Hello everyone, I am Sahid. Thank you for clicking this video. I'm very happy that you're here. Today I'll be continuing my chapter series on Blessings by Chukwuebuka Ibeh. Today we'll be reading part 2, chapter 13. Wow, we're already in chapter 13 and I can't believe it, but I'm also glad because I've been consistent with reading this book and it's just been really entertaining, just being immersed into the story, the structure of the novel, and the characters that I've felt connected to, especially Obifuna. And so I'm just so excited to continue this journey with you guys and to continue reading this book. But before I start today's chapter reading on chapter 13, like my other chapter videos, I sort of like to give a brief recap slash summary of what I read about in the previous chapter, which was chapter 12. In chapter 12, we get introduced into this sort of new character. We get introduced to this new character. His name is Mordecai. People call him Sparrow. That's what the boys, the students in the school call him. And Sparrow is this really cool boy in Obifuna's boarding school. But like we know by now, hopefully, if you're not a new viewer, Obifuna was sent to boarding school in Owerri, but he originally was born in Port Harcourt. But basically his father, ngozi, sent him to boarding school after basically catching him having sort of this intimate moment with this other character, slash that the Obifuna's family's sort of houseboy. His name was a boy, and he was this boy who was brought from the village to sort of find more opportunities in Port Harcourt. And when his father sort of catches him, having this moment, he decides to tell his wife Uzamaka that he wants to send Obifuna to boarding school, despite Obifuna just doing really well in his former school and getting good grades, doing well on like this the country exams like the YEC and the junior YEC. And he was a really good student. Even the headmistress was, upset at the fact that he was sent away despite his brother Ekene was still there. But to go back to Obifuna's boarding school, this character Sparrow, he's sort of this cool guy. He sort of has his friend group. They're sort of popular. The teachers adore them. Even Obifuna slightly admired them in a way. They dressed immaculately. They had a sense of how do I say this, conceited energy to them, even though a sense of power to them, even though none of them really had a sort of physical appearance that made people feel as though they had power. It was just sort of that their sense of attitude, the way they sort of carried themselves in a way. But anyways, there was this sort of scene that sort of starts Obifuna and Sparrow sort of relationship. So there's something called sort of the prefectship that's sort of prevalent in Obifuna's boarding school. And so these are sort of the school leaders. And so when you get in, to become a prefect, people would respect you. You sort of have this sort of leadership role among the school. And this is something that Sparrow was sort of like front row, of. And Obifuna also thought of sort of possibly running, but he just lacked the confidence in a way. He had his friend Jeku, and who by now I believe, if you've been reading this book with me, Jeku is one of Obifuna's friends that he made early on when he started his journey in boarding school. And Jeku and his other friend Wisdom played a crucial role in helping him sort of adjust to this new space he was in, this new setting he was in. And so they've been friends for a while, since a few months and almost a year now that he's been in the boarding school, if not over a year. But anyways, Jacob, he's running for this prefect position, and Sparrow is also running. And there was a scene in which Sparrow needed sort of, I guess, a tie before he goes on to do his speech, because they have to give speech and sort of express why they want to have this position. But anyways, basically Jeku was preparing for his speech, sort of nervous, not sure what to do, and asking Obifuna sort of, does he, how should he do this, how should he do that? And Obifuna was sort of advising him, all you have to do is sound like yourself. And he was just sort of just trying to figure out what he was going to do. But anyways, Sparrow comes up to them, sort of asking for a tie. But specifically, he asks Jeku, and Jeku sort of, is telling him that, why would you, I don't know if he said why would you, but he sort of basically confronted him in a way that, how come you sort of come to ask me for a tie? Like, I'm not also running for this post. Like, he sort of is confronting him, saying that, you're not the only one, and there are other students who are also running, so how dare you, come up to me? But then Obifuna just goes on to say, oh, I can give you mine. And Jeku just felt deeply betrayed, because obviously this is somebody Jeku is like going to be competing with to get this post and to become this leader, and you, my close friend, you're offering him a tie. So he felt slightly betrayed. And then Sparrow, on the other hand, sort of looked at Obifuna in a puzzled but amused way. And then when he got the tie, he was grateful. He said he would never forget this. And then so that's sort of how their relationship started. And then later on, Sparrow goes to go back to Obifuna's dorm to return the tie. And then that's when Wisdom also realized that, oh, he sort of has this new friendship with Sparrow, this person who obviously a lot of people slightly envied in a way. Even when Wisdom sort of said what he said about Obifuna sort of becoming friends with him, he sounded a bit envious and sort of disapproving of his friendship with Sparrow. But Obifuna doesn't let that get to him. He continues to sort of have this relationship with Sparrow, and they continue to build their relationship. It started with when Sparrow was sort of asking Obifuna about his passion for reading, because Obifuna sort of had this book about this this woman from Nigeria who moved to London, and it was a book by Buchie Cheta, and he sort of was talking about it. And I guess Sparrow also reads, and he knew other books by the author, so they talked about it, and so they started building a little connection. But overall, they continued to build the connection over the years, and it became sort of like a routine. They got to know each other, and they got to a point in which they were having sort of an intimate relationship with one another. They were doing things as we read about in the last chapter videos. I'm not gonna go back about the things they did, but they had very intimate intimate relationships, and they were kissing, doing crazy things. But anyways, it gets to a point in which they get caught, and this is when things get slightly bad. Obifuna happened to escape the situation because they had to do this in secret, and where they would do it in secret is below this dark staircase. And this one time, one of, I guess, the admins in the school, Sir CY, catches them. Excuse me, he catches particularly Sparrow, because when Obifuna and Sparrow were having this intimate relationship, in the moment when they were caught, they were sort of kissing each other, and Obifuna happened to know that somebody was. At first, he didn't know, but when he saw the torchlight that was sort of flashing at them, he quickly ran, and so the person didn't get to capture Obifuna's face, and so he escaped. But Sparrow, on the other hand, was facing towards the person, and so the person was able to see Sparrow's face, and then he basically was exposed. The story got out. All the students at school knew about it. He got bullied, and it was just really sad reading that. It was really devastating, and at some point he has to go in front of the crowd, sort of expressing what he did, and then he had to also end up leaving the school. I am trying to sort of summarize this because I don't want to prolong my summary. But anyways, he had to leave the school, and this was very unfortunate. But Obifuna was also sort of, he felt sad about the whole situation. But deep down, he felt as though this was a relief to him, because he didn't want them to know that he was also part of this. And one thing I really admired about Sparrow was the fact that he kept Obifuna's name secret the whole time. And this really showed me that I think he really did love Obifuna, and I feel as though Obifuna also loved him, and it was really getting to a point they were forming a sense of love between one another, not just doing sexual stuff, but a sense of love between one another. And now that this happened, it broke that apart. That a part of Obifuna felt relief, even though he knew deep down was evil. The fact that he felt relief by the fact that he was leaving the school, and he still had this fear and uncertainty that maybe one day Sparrow would just come back and sort of expose him and tell everyone, or before he left that day, he would just come and scream his name, but Sparrow didn't do that, and he just let it go. And Obifuna tried to sort of get his attention, and just before the whole, going on the stage, Obifuna tried his hardest to make sure that he didn't tell anyone. And there was this look that Sparrow gave him that made him see just the empty, made him feel empty and sort of emotional, because he just could see the emptiness in Sparrow's eye, even though he didn't really express any words, but he just didn't want to engage himself with Obifuna. And so he had to leave, and Obifuna, it gets to this point in which he feels relieved, but deep down he's still just deeply sad, and he feels sort of slightly guilty and fearful about what's going to happen. And anyways, Obifuna ends up sort of having this position to become the sanitary prefect, and this was a position that Sparrow formerly had, so it really was surprising to him. But basically, the person who caught them, Sir CY, and this other man, Sir Okafor, sort of suggests that Obifuna becomes, because he has sort of this great application, and they want him to do it, even though he just didn't have any plans for that. So Obifuna at first thought of it as a wild joke, and thought it was sort of like a setup. But I don't know if it was a setup. So that's actually what I'm looking forward to reading about in chapter 13 today, to see if they're gonna set him up or if they know. But anyways, Obifuna becomes this officer. He sort of does this assembly. He speaks in front of the crowd. Everybody's cheering. But deep down, he knew that somewhere and someone in that crowd most likely knew what happened between Obifuna and Sparrow. And that's sort of how chapter 12 ends. But yeah, I'm going to read chapter 13 now. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you watch all the way to the end. Please continue to support. I really appreciate it. And now I'll read chapter 13. Part 2, chapter 13. Obifuna sat through the sermon, awash with shame. The title itself, A Reprobate Mind, made him chafe under its stern condemnation. The chaplain's voice was raised for most of the time, as though the amplification of the microphone poised at his lips was not enough to drive home his point. He read from the Bible, chilling verses that threatened God's wrath for the many vices listed. He was given to dramatic pauses filled in on cue by the instrumentalist who replayed somber sounds to the room. Obifuna kept his head bowed through the chronicle of the backsliding children of Israel. The audacious transgressions of Ananias and Sapphira, Ananias and Sapphira, but it was the verse about the men of Sodom and Gomorrah that made his eyes twitch. Some of you here are just like that, the chaplain screamed from the altar. Desiring your fellow boys, shame on you. He spoke with a trembling vigor, as if about to dissolve into tears. Obifuna half expected the chaplain to hurl the microphone at him. He was relieved when the chaplain asked them all to stand, signaling the end of the sermon. It was the time for an altar call. If you are here and you know you are still caged in any immorality, if you are here and you know you are still caged in any immorality, there is hope for you. Jesus Christ welcomes all lost souls. Here's your last chance for salvation. Obifuna tensed. He could hear the mass shuffling of feet around him, of boys heading towards the altar, and yet he remained where he was. Even when the chaplain demanded all eyes remain closed, pointing out Ananias and Sapphira's fate as a consequence of disobedience and deceit in God's house, Obifuna did not move. His guilt ate at him, but he stood still. The chaplain had not been specific. It could be any of the many sins listed. No one would figure him out, but Obifuna stayed. He felt a lurch to be a defeat, and in response, he pinned his toes hard to the ground until they hurt from inside his shoes. A small, hard fear like knots formed in his chest. The chaplain stepped forward. The chaplain The chaplain was concluding the prayers of forgiveness. It was his chance to step forward and be delivered. He was just a moment away. He opened his eyes and turned to ask the person next to him to excuse him, and then the chaplain said, "Amen." For days he did not sleep well. He jolted awake from nightmarish images of being in a steady, bottomless descent. His hands and feet bound, loud, sinister laughter about him. At bath time, the thought of touching his own body disgusted him. More than once, Jeku asked him if he was okay. Something about the genuine concern on his friend's face made him long to tell Jeku, but had he had played out the inevitable outcome many times in his mind's eye. Jeku flinching at the revelation, avoiding him afterwards. He resented the possibility just as he resented Jeku. Most of all, he resented himself. His mother heard something in his voice over the phone and asked him what was wrong. "Obiajulu, I'm your mother. You can tell me," she said. And for that sole reason, for that earnest in her tone, he had almost told her. "Yes, I heard you." It was his ability, ultimately, to frame the words, to give voice to something of despicably real inside him, and his inability to envisage and live with his mother's reaction that made him say, "I'm fine, mommy. I have a little headache." "Ewo, sorry, Inu, have you visited the clinic?" He said yes and changed the subject. Her naivety, her naivety, born of trust, saddened him. He could see the chaplain he had decided that evening. Perhaps visit him at home. It was not a place where the students normally called, but the chaplain, when he listened to Obifuna's reasons, would certainly understand the need for privacy. But what if the chaplain did not welcome Obifuna's presence in his home? What if the chaplain sent him away in disgust, or worse, exposed him to the school for having lied all the while? Something about the chaplain's fierce hostility made this possibility more likely. The chaplain might also be incensed by his not having obeyed the altar call. Obifuna dreaded to think of what would follow, but he went. Skipping dinner, Obifuna left the school compound and took the lone, tree-lined path of the semi-detached bungalow. Any fucking ways. His mother heard something in his voice. Okay. Something about the genuine concern on his friend's face made him long to tell Jeku, but he had played out the inevitable outcome. Something about the genuine concern on his friend's face made him long to tell Jeku, but he had played out the inevitable outcome many times in his mind's eye. Jeku flinching at the revelation, avoiding him afterwards. He resented the possibility just as he resented Jeku. Most of all, he resented himself. His mother heard something in his voice over the phone and asked him what was wrong. "Obiajulu, I'm your mother. You can tell me." Obiajulu, I'm your mother. You can tell me, she said. And for that sole reason, for that earnestness in her tone, he had almost told her. It was his inability, ultimately, to frame the words, to give voice to something so despicably real inside him, and his inability to envisage and live with his mother's reaction that had made him say, I'm fine, mommy. I just have a little headache. Hey, whoa, sorry, no. Have you visited the clinic? Hey, whoa, sorry, no. Have you visited the clinic? He said yes and changed the subject. Her naivety, born of trust, saddened him. He would see the chaplain, he had decided, that evening. Perhaps visit him at home. It was not a place where the students normally called, but the chaplain, when he listened to Obifuna's reasons, would certainly understand the need for privacy. But what if the chaplain did not welcome Obifuna's presence in his home? What if the chaplain sent him away in disgust, or worse, exposed him to the school for having lied all the while? Something about the chaplain's fiery hostility made this possibility more likely. The chaplain might also be incensed by his not having obeyed the altar call. Obifuna dreaded to think of what would follow, but he went. Skipping dinner, Obifuna left the school compound and took the lone, tree-lined path to the semi-detached bungalow the chaplain shared with the school's bursar. The sight of the weathered building with peeling yellow paint in the distance filled Obifuna with a numbing terror. His double raps on the wooden door were light, and he half hoped they would go unacknowledged. But he heard the lock turn from within, and the door was slowly eased open. At first he saw no one, and then he made her out, crouched beside the door, a section of her face the only part of her visible. It was the first time he was gazing at the chaplain's wife up close, and something about her face disconcerted him. He had a feeling his presence had ruffled her. Yes? She asked from behind the door. Good evening, ma. I want to see the chaplain, he said. She came into full view then. She came into full view then and took her time to blow her nose into a handkerchief, studying him all the while. Is there a problem? He hesitated, debating whether to nod or to shake his head. No, ma. She gave him a long look. The chaplain is not in at the moment. Her voice sounded hoarse, as if she had a cold, and she seemed to hold on to the door lightly, as though terrified of it while also deriving support from it. You can come in and wait for him if it is very important, she said. Obifuna did not want to wait, but she had already moved away from the door into the house, leaving it ajar, and there was nothing else to do but to take off his shoes and follow her in. The narrow corridor led to a small living room, sparsely furnished. The windows were open, but the curtains were drawn, giving the room a blue-dimmed interior. A citrus fragrance, like warm oranges, hung in the air. She gestured to a chair. Do you want water? He shook his head. The seat was soft and felt cold to the touch. Something about the doleful, faraway look in her eyes, her distracted air, made him wonder if she was all right. When she disappeared through the curtains, he found himself leaning forward in his seat, straining for a sound. There was a forbidding aura about the living room that made it seem wrong to be there. He had the disquieting sensation of peeping through the keyhole of an elderly woman's bathroom, an intimate shame accompanying the thrill of it. He looked at the framed pictures hanging on the wall. Most of them were of the chaplain, sporting a grin in three-piece suits, sitting cross-legged in a graduation cap and gown as a youngish man in Ankara-styled material. There were no pictures of their wedding. The only pictures of her on the wall were two photos taken with the chaplain, one in front of a banner with the revival theme behind them, the other of them sitting side by side in identical prints, her blank expression in sharp contrast with the chaplain's wide grin, her small hands extended forward and slightly buried underneath the chaplain's. With her slight stature, her round face free of makeup, he could have passed for her father. "What's your name?" Obifuna turned with a start to see her standing by the curtains, her arms folded across her chest, gazing at him intently. "Obifuna," he said. She nodded slowly, as though thinking deeply about the name. She covered the short distance between them and sat on the chair next to him. Her knees gazed his. "Why do you want to see the chaplain?" she asked. Obifuna stared at her. There was something almost enigmatic in her carriage, in the way she looked right at him, as if she could see through him. It brought a blood curdling stillness to his heart. But the woman couldn't have known. He had been able to hide himself well. "You can talk to me, Obifuna." His name on her lips sounded firm, as if she knew him. He focused on counting the lined patterns on the blue carpet. It suddenly felt too warm against the soles of his feet, which might become scalded if left there a moment longer. He was startled by the sudden sound of the bell for prep. He rose. "I have to go now, Ma." She stared at him a while longer before she nodded. As he headed for the door, she called out suddenly, halting him. "Obifuna." He turned to her. "Ma, there's nothing God cannot do if you tell him and believe in your heart that he would do it." From where he stood, he could get a better view of her face. It was composed now, but whatever she had applied underneath her lids had not entirely concealed the puffiness. He wondered how long she had been crying, if she would continue after he left. She turned her back to him and walked through the curtains. Outside the house, Obifuna stood in front of the flowers closest to the driveway for a long time, marveled at, of all things, how quickly night had descended. Obifuna prayed. He signed up to join the prayer warriors unit dutifully, attended every session on Friday nights, staying long after everyone else had gone, kneeling before the altar. The prayers for deliverance typically came last, related in earnest whispers. Sometimes he found himself in tears as he prayed, something within him expanding to bursting. The chaplain's wife's voice replayed in his head, at odd intervals. She had seen him. Between them, a silent communication had passed, a mutual confidence without the need for words. He wondered about her. He knew she and the chaplain had been married for 8 years without having a child. Some of the boys in the junior class claim to have woken on many nights to the sound of her voice all the way from her home, praying. Obifuna also wondered if her husband beat her. It was the imagery that quickly came to mind. The chaplain, as large and severe looking as he was, his wife, lissom and fragile. Did he use his fists or a leather belt? Did he cradle her in his arms afterwards, saying over and over that he was forced to hurt her until she apologized? In some of his prayers, Obifuna slowed down to a conversation, and he imagined God flinching at the terse inquiries about why he would create him this way, knowing it was a wrong way to live. Other times he begged, reasoning that God would be willing to engage with him if he were contrite and docile, if he simply asked for forgiveness. His understanding of God, after all, was that he was a person who forgave mistakes. Sometimes he believed that God had answered and that he was changed, that something had snapped free in him, a weight had been lifted, a newness born. And sometimes he could feel God's silence hanging over him, his prayers and occasional crying were mere pathetic sighs in God's ears. On one such night, he woke to find himself on the floor of the altar. It was past midnight. The side of his face ached from being pressed to the hard floor for too long. He pulled himself up and stood with his hands in his pockets in the dark on the altar of an empty chapel far away from home. And then he brushed his clothes to get rid of the dust and went back to the house. And that is the end of chapter 13. Let's talk about it. Okay. I'm just gonna go back actually. So chapter 13 was kind of different in a way. We know that due to the recent sort of, you know, event that happened in Obifuna's boarding school with Sparrow and Obifuna and the entire school, sort of just finding out about what he and Sparrow had done, even though they didn't know that it was Obifuna. They knew, Sparrow and this other, person did something, and Obifuna has been filled with fear, uncertainty, guilt, and a sense of just sadness about just not speaking up or just not, expressing the truth when it was required, especially because of, you know, how Sparrow was just treated independently, and how he was bullied, humiliated, he was sent out of the school. All these things just really crushed Obifuna deep down. And in chapter 13, we explore sort of his difficulties in a sort of religious sort of aspect. We know that this school is sort of obviously this really religious school. It's a boarding school, and they're very strong on religion and prioritizing the sort of Christian religion, Christianity. We know this through the the Sunday sermons and the Sunday um, sort of meetings that they go to, the students go to, and they have to go to because it's something that's part of sort of the boarding school the boarding school curriculum. And so there was a current. I'm gonna go back to the book. There was sort of this. So in chapter 13, we see this through sort of a sermon that was occurring that Obifuna attended. And this sermon, the title was what sort of made it interesting. Um, the title was uh, it was titled "A Reprobate Mind," and in this sermon, the chaplain sort of emphasizes on the sins that people commit. And so there was a point I think he emphasizes on how, he sort of says, shame on you boys, emphasizing basically on sort of the corruption or this sort of perspective of viewing sort of homosexuality as a sin and a corruption within sort of the school. And he sort of, Obifuna, obviously with everything that's been going on, he feels slightly shameful just being in this room in which the sermon was happening and other students obviously being in the same room, and this chaplain who he has seen as somebody with sort of this kind of authority because of just all the way he preaches, the way he speaks on the mic and commands his voice. Obifuna just feels really tensed up and so shameful just hearing the whole speech, and how he basically is emphasizing something that he did and he hasn't spoken about to anyone, hasn't asked for forgiveness. So basically, the chaplain is emphasizing how Jesus Christ is, forgives those who commit sin as long as asks for forgiveness and salvation. But yeah, we have that, and then after that, Obifuna is sort of left sort of unsure what to do. He constantly thinking about speaking up, but then he's thinking about just the possibilities of what could occur when he does speak up about this really major thing that has happened in his life. And with this sort of chaplain commanding things and seeing the other students go ahead and make moves and do the right things to, I guess, ask for forgiveness, but he's not doing that. He feels guilty. He keeps pondering, thinking, moping when he's finally going to do something. Even when he's in the shower, he feels disgusted at the sense of himself. He can't even touch his own body without feeling disgusted because he knows what he, I guess, has done. Something that society basically made him feel as though it was just completely a crime in a way, something that should be banished, something that shouldn't be allowed. And so he just feels deeply disgusted in himself, and it's really sad reading that. But to continue, we you have his friend Jeku who sort of acts in him. He could see in Obifuna's sort of attitude, his face, that he just wasn't well. And so Jacob asks him how he's doing, and Obifuna, obviously afraid and thinking about the possibility of Jacob, stopping um their friendship, or Jacob would have not been his friend anymore. Or if he does tell him the truth, because he does want to, but he knows deep down what this could cause to their friendship, and so he doesn't. And so he keeps this thing to himself, but then he ends up thinking of making the decision to going to go see the chaplain in sort of in a private tone. And so he makes sort of this decision to go visit the chaplain in his house. He's still unsure, but he ends up deciding to do this. And when he does go to the chaplain house, he was first approached by his wife. His wife opens the door. She's sort of asking him, yes, why are you here? What's your name? Why are you here to see the chaplain? He sort of is basically, sort of vaguely responding to her, because obviously he is not here to speak to her. He's here to speak to her husband, who is a chaplain. And this lady, looked like she's been dealing with like a cold. She has a fucking handkerchief when she first opened the door, sort of blowing her nose, like, and then just based on the description by the author, she had certain sort of puffiness. The house sort of had this sort of like tension to it, sort of aura to it, that made him feel he shouldn't have been there. So all these things just make sort of creating this sort of setting in a way, that made Obifuna unsure, if he should truly make the decision to tell her. So after she tells him to wait in the house, he does wait in the house. He's looking around, analyzing, and that's how we sort of know these different things that Obifuna is seeing, and sort of how he's feeling in the moment. But when she comes out, she asks him again, is there something you need to talk about? And Obifuna is sort of unsure, either to sort of shake his head, nod. She's sort of telling him that she's here to listen to him if he has anything to say. But Obifuna sort of is unsure if he wants to do this, and he ends up not really saying what he was truly here to say to her, obviously because he wasn't here to see her, but also it's the fear of just expressing this, obviously this thing that he views as a sin to her, and just what she would feel about it. Obviously she's like this older woman, she's been married to this man, and we come to also hear more. She then sort of tells him that there's nothing God can't forgive as long as you have to forgive. I think I'm not quoting exactly what she said, right? But she was basically just emphasizing on the fact that she understands, and she feels as though when he feels the right time, he should basically just talk to God and ask for forgiveness, because God forgives people with mistakes, and this is something that he also deep down knows. But after that, he just keeps thinking about that whole situation, and he ends up sort of joining this sort of prayers, I believe, meeting thing that he started going to very frequently, and he started going to chapel more. And this was Obifuna's way of sort of, I guess, talking to God, and this was something he now made a routine in a way. He became more close to just expressing and asking for forgiveness for this thing he just has been feeling really ashamed about. And as a student and a young boy in a certain circumstance, with everyone sort of telling you, you need to repent, you need to ask for forgiveness, you need to talk to God, you obviously would want to make the decision to do that, because this is what would make you feel slightly less ashamed in a way. And so he starts to do this, and that's sort of how the chapter ends, about his sort of commitment now to being more connected to God and asking God for forgiveness, and also thinking about sort of why God sort of created him or put him into this sort of, I guess, body with this identity. He questioned all these things, and I think this is something that many queer and religious people often have to think about. Especially when you grew up in sort of, I guess, a religious household, and a very strict household, it really is a struggle dealing with this sort of part of you that obviously is seen by your other part of you, your religious side of you, that it's wrong. And it really is complex trying to manage those two things. So you question things like that. You question why you were born like this, in this quote unquote wrong way. And so it really was sad reading that, but I felt really just seen in a way, and it's obviously sad. And as I continue to read this book, I just know there might be a part even tears might fill up in my eyes, and I'll just start crying because of just how sad and just really real the story and this overall um book is. And yeah, that is my recap of today's chapter video. If you enjoyed this video, please kindly subscribe, like, and comment. I hope to see you in the later chapter videos. And yes, thank you so much for sticking all the way to the end. I appreciate and cherish you deeply. Thank you. Bye.